Close your eyes and imagine the 13 American colonies long ago stretching along the eastern coast. Life moved slowly. Farmers tending fields, children playing in quiet streets and towns lit softly by lanterns. Across the ocean, a distant empire watched, unaware that ordinary people were quietly beginning to dream of freedom. This is the gentle story of a time when the world was changing, one calm step at a time, leading to the American Revolutionary War. In the 18th century, the vast Atlantic separated two worlds, a powerful empire across the ocean, and 13 colonies struggling to define their place within it. On one side was Britain, the most powerful empire in the world, with an unmatched navy, a disciplined army, and wealth flowing from colonies spanning every corner of the globe. On the other side were 13 North American colonies, scattered along the eastern seaboard, filled with ordinary men and women, farmers, merchants, artisans, and tradesmen, all yearning for freedom and the ability to chart their own destiny. Life in the American colonies was both vibrant and complex. The 13 colonies, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, were diverse in culture, economy, and politics. Some, like Massachusetts and New York, thrived on trade, shipbuilding, and commerce. Others, like Virginia and South Carolina, relied heavily on plantations and agriculture. Despite these differences, a common thread began to weave through the colonies. A growing awareness of their own identity, a sense that they were distinct from Britain, and a belief that they deserved the right to govern themselves. The British Empire had governed these colonies for over a century. For the most part, the relationship had been relatively stable, with the colonies enjoying a degree of self-governance under local assemblies. But as Britain expanded its global influence and fought costly wars, particularly the French and Indian War, its demands on the colonies increased. The empire expected obedience, taxes, and support for military campaigns, and soon the seeds of resentment began to grow in fertile ground. By the mid-18th century, Britain was burdened with debt from the French and Indian War, a struggle fought across North America for dominance between European empires and their allied Native American tribes. To recover, Britain looked to its American colonies for revenue, introducing policies and taxes that would soon ignite the flames of rebellion. These were not ordinary taxes. They were perceived as unjust and invasive, striking at the very idea of local control. In 1765, Parliament passed the Stamp Act, requiring all printed materials, from newspapers and pamphlets to legal documents and licenses, to carry an official tax stamp. For the colonists, this was more than a financial burden. It was a symbol of oppression. They had no representation in the British Parliament and saw these taxes as an attack on their rights. Their rallying cry, "No taxation without representation," resonated across towns and villages, uniting disparate communities under a common cause. Resistance to the Stamp Act was swift and powerful. Merchants organized boycotts, assemblies convened to denounce British policies, and public demonstrations became commonplace. Though Britain eventually repealed the Stamp Act in 1766, the precedent had been set. The colonies could act collectively, challenge imperial authority, and force change. The idea of unity, once theoretical, became practical and tangible. But the struggle was far from over. Britain soon introduced the Townshend Acts of 1767, placing duties on imported goods such as glass, paint, paper, and tea. Once again, the colonies reacted, protesting and boycotting British goods. The tension escalated, turning everyday interactions into acts of political significance. Merchants refused to import taxed goods, and citizens began questioning the very nature of their loyalty to the crown. In 1773, these tensions erupted into dramatic action during the Boston Tea Party. Colonists, furious at the Tea Act, which granted the British East India Company a monopoly on tea, disguised themselves and dumped hundreds of chests of tea into Boston Harbor. This act of defiance was bold, symbolic, and irreversible, marking a point of no return in colonial British relations. While economic pressures fueled discontent, ideology provided the moral and intellectual foundation for rebellion. Enlightenment ideas, particularly those of John Locke, argued that governments exist to protect natural rights, life, liberty, and property. When a government fails to protect these rights, citizens are justified in challenging its authority. These principles resonated deeply in the colonies, giving the struggle against Britain both purpose and legitimacy. Colonial leaders, educated men like Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin, began articulating a vision of governance based on consent, liberty, and equality. This was a radical shift from centuries of monarchy, yet it provided a compelling justification for resistance. The colonies were no longer merely subjects. They were citizens entitled to rights, and they would defend them. By 1770, tensions boiled over in what became known as the Boston Massacre. British soldiers, confronted by a hostile crowd, opened fire, killing 5 colonists. The incident was widely publicized through engravings and pamphlets, inflaming anti-British sentiment. It was a stark reminder. The empire was willing to use force against its own people, and the colonies were becoming increasingly united in opposition. In the years that followed, the British government sought to tighten control. The Coercive Acts of 1774, referred to by the colonists as the Intolerable Acts, closed Boston Harbor, restricted town meetings, and allowed British officials accused of crimes to be tried in England. These punitive measures, intended to quell dissent, only fueled the fires of resistance, convincing colonists that liberty was under siege and that self-determination could no longer be delayed. In response, the colonies began to organize. Local militias were formed, leaders coordinated across regions, and communication networks developed to share intelligence and strategy. For the first time, the idea of a united front against Britain was not just a concept, it was becoming a reality. Amid these political and ideological developments were ordinary men and women facing extraordinary circumstances. Farmers left fields untended to join militias. Merchants risked their businesses by refusing British imports. Families debated the risks of rebellion over dinner tables. The revolutionary spirit was not confined to halls of power. It permeated every level of society, from bustling cities to remote rural settlements. The revolution, as it would come to be known, was as much about ordinary people as it was about leaders and generals. In New England, towns like Lexington and Concord braced for confrontation. In Virginia, planters and tradesmen debated loyalty and rebellion. Across the colonies, people asked themselves, could they challenge the most powerful empire on earth? Could they risk everything for liberty and self-determination? These questions would soon be answered on the battlefield. By the mid-1770s, the stage was set for a confrontation that would change the world. The 13 colonies were no longer passive territories. They were restless, organized, and inspired by ideas of liberty. Britain, confident in its military might, underestimated the resolve of its distant subjects. Across the ocean, ordinary men and women prepared to step into history, setting in motion a struggle for independence that would reverberate for centuries. This was more than a war over taxes or trade. It was a war of identity, a struggle to define what it meant to be free, and to claim the right to govern one's own destiny. The American Revolutionary War was about to begin, and the world was about to witness the birth of a new nation. From economic hardship to ideological awakening, from acts of defiance to organized resistance, the colonies had reached a tipping point. The dawn of revolution had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. The American Revolutionary War did not erupt overnight. It was the result of decades of growing tension, miscommunication, and frustration. The 13 colonies had grown accustomed to a degree of self-governance, developing their own economies, cultures, and communities. Over time, however, the British Empire's policies began to create friction as distant lawmakers imposed taxes, regulations, and restrictions without understanding the lives of those who lived thousands of miles away. The stage was set slowly but surely, and the path to conflict was shaped by forces both tangible and ideological, small yet cumulative actions that would eventually spark a revolution. Economic control was one of the primary sources of tension. Britain sought to maintain profit from the colonies while funding its own empire, and it imposed a series of taxes and trade regulations designed to maximize revenue. The first major point of contention was the Stamp Act of 1765, which required all printed materials, newspapers, legal documents, pamphlets, and even playing cards, to carry a government-issued stamp. For the colonists, this was more than a financial burden. It was a symbol of intrusion into their daily lives and their sense of independence. Farmers, shopkeepers, and merchants suddenly found themselves subjected to a tax they had no role in shaping. The act sparked widespread protests, from town meetings to public demonstrations, and became a rallying point for colonial resistance. People burned stamps in the streets, organized boycotts of British goods, and began to see themselves as part of a collective movement, united by the shared experience of injustice. The Stamp Act was followed by the Townshend Acts of 1767, placing duties on imported goods such as paper, glass, paint, and tea. Once again, the colonies reacted, boycotting British imports and writing petitions demanding the repeal of unfair taxes. This was not merely an economic argument, but a political one, a statement that ordinary people were capable of self-governance and would not tolerate arbitrary control from across an ocean. Trade restrictions added further strain. The Navigation Acts dictated that all colonial trade passed through Britain, ensuring that profits flowed to the empire rather than remaining in local markets. Colonists who had grown accustomed to relative freedom in their commercial dealings found these rules restrictive and oppressive. Merchants and shipbuilders in New England in particular felt the weight of these regulations, and their discontent spread to the wider population. The Tea Act of 1773, which granted the British East India Company a monopoly on tea, became the spark that ignited dramatic acts of defiance. Colonists, fearing the loss of economic autonomy in local businesses, staged the Boston Tea Party, dumping hundreds of chests of tea into the harbor. This act of rebellion was bold, symbolic, and irreversible, making it clear that the colonies were no longer willing to accept unfair economic control. Britain's response was severe, attempting to punish Massachusetts with the Coercive Acts, known to the colonists as the Intolerable Acts. Boston Harbor was closed, town meetings restricted, and British officials accused of crimes were allowed to be tried in England rather than locally. Far from quelling dissent, these measures united the colonies in outrage, showing that the empire was willing to exert force without regard for local rights or traditions. Political grievances were equally important in shaping the path to revolution. The colonies had long enjoyed a degree of self-governance through local assemblies, where citizens could voice concerns and influence decisions affecting their communities. Over time, colonists had come to expect a say in their governance, and the sudden imposition of taxes and laws by a distant parliament felt like a betrayal. The phrase "no taxation without representation" captured this frustration. Colonists argued that only their elected assemblies had the right to tax them, while Britain maintained that Parliament had authority over all its territories. This fundamental disagreement over political power created a growing sense of alienation between Britain and its American subjects. It was no longer just about money, it was about control, voice, and the legitimacy of governance itself. The colonies also began to develop a stronger sense of identity and community. While culturally tied to Britain, the colonists had grown accustomed to independence in daily life, community governance, and economic activity. Families, towns, and cities had evolved their own norms, traditions, and expectations separate from those imposed by the empire. Social factors such as class and participation in community life contributed to a shared sense of purpose. Farmers, artisans, merchants, and laborers all began to recognize that they had a stake in protecting local autonomy and defending their communities from outside control. Ordinary people, once focused solely on survival and livelihood, found themselves united by a common cause that transcended social and economic differences. Ideas and philosophy played a crucial role in shaping the revolutionary mindset. Enlightenment thinkers such as John Locke argued that governments existed to protect the natural rights of citizens, life, liberty, and property, and that when a government failed in this duty, people were justified in resisting. These ideas spread rapidly through pamphlets, newspapers, and discussions in homes and coffee houses, reaching both leaders and ordinary colonists. The language of liberty, equality, and self-determination became part of everyday conversation, providing not just justification for resistance, but inspiration. Influential colonial figures like Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin began to articulate visions of governance based on consent and individual rights. The colonists' struggle was no longer only practical or economic. It became moral and philosophical, rooted in principles that would guide the revolution and the formation of a new nation. While long-term causes had been building for decades, immediate events acted as catalysts for open rebellion. In 1770, the Boston Massacre, in which British soldiers fired upon a crowd of colonists and killed 5, intensified anger and fear. The incident was widely publicized through pamphlets, drawings, and newspapers, casting the British as oppressors willing to use deadly force against innocent civilians. This fueled resentment across the colonies and turned passive discontent into active opposition. The Tea Act and the subsequent Boston Tea Party were another spark. Britain's harsh response through the coercive acts only confirmed that compromise with the empire was no longer feasible. Colonists began preparing for conflict, organizing militias, and establishing communication networks across regions. Ordinary citizens were now part of a larger movement, engaging in discussions about loyalty, duty, and the possibility of independence. The colonies were also conscious of the wider global context. Rival powers such as France and Spain, enemies of Britain, had their own reasons to weaken the empire. While not directly causing the revolution, their existence offered hope that Britain could be challenged, providing both strategic and psychological support. The realization that the colonies were not entirely isolated strengthened the resolve of leaders and ordinary citizens alike. They began to imagine a future where the 13 colonies could govern themselves, independent of British control, and perhaps even thrive as a free and prosperous people. In everyday life, the revolution was becoming tangible. Farmers left fields untended to join militia drills. Artisans refused to sell goods that would support British trade. Merchants risked businesses by boycotting imported items. Families debated the morality of rebellion over dinner tables. Across the colonies, people began to see themselves as participants in something far larger than their individual lives. What had begun as scattered grievances against taxation and regulation had evolved into a shared sense of identity, a vision of self-determination, and a moral argument for liberty. By the early 1770s, the colonies were tense yet organized. Committees of correspondence communicated across towns and provinces, sharing news of British actions and colonial responses. Militias trained openly, citizens debated the limits of loyalty, and ordinary people recognized that their choices could shape the future of the continent. The stage was set for confrontation, and the accumulated pressures, economic, political, social, and ideological, were impossible to ignore. The colonies had reached a tipping point. The question was no longer whether resistance would occur, but how it would unfold, and whether the people could rise to meet the challenge against the might of the British Empire. In summary, The causes of the American Revolutionary War were complex, intertwined, and cumulative. Long-term economic pressures, including taxes and trade restrictions, created widespread dissatisfaction. Political grievances over representation and local governance fueled anger. Social factors and the emergence of a shared identity fostered unity across classes. Enlightenment ideas provided both justification and inspiration for rebellion. Immediate events, such as the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party, served as sparks that ignited decades of tension. With every passing year, the colonies moved closer to a confrontation that would ultimately reshape the world. Ordinary men and women, influenced by circumstance, principle, and hope, were poised to take their place in history. The causes were clear, the grievances undeniable, and the desire for freedom had taken root so deeply that it could not be extinguished. The revolution was not inevitable, but it had become almost impossible to avoid, and the stage was fully set for the remarkable struggle that would soon unfold. The tensions that had been simmering for decades finally erupted into open conflict in 1775, signaling the start of a war that would define the future of the American colonies. What had begun as protests, petitions, and acts of civil disobedience gradually escalated into armed confrontation, as the colonies realized that their grievances would not be addressed peacefully. In towns and villages across Massachusetts and beyond, ordinary people, farmers, artisans, and tradesmen prepared for a struggle that seemed impossible yet necessary. They faced an empire with the world's most powerful army and navy, but they were driven by a conviction that freedom, once glimpsed, could not be surrendered. In the early months of 1775, the British authorities in Boston were increasingly aware of the growing unrest. News of militia training and stockpiling of arms had reached the royal governors, raising concerns that a minor spark could ignite widespread rebellion. Colonial leaders, understanding the inevitability of confrontation, were also preparing their communities. Committees of correspondence had connected towns and villages across the region, allowing information to flow rapidly. Citizens shared reports of British troop movements, discussed strategies for self-defense, and began organizing local militias. The energy in these communities was a mix of anxiety, determination, and cautious optimism. The first flashpoint came in the spring of 1775 in the towns of Lexington and Concord. In April, British troops, under orders to seize colonial arms stored in Concord, marched from Boston with the intent of disarming the local militias. The colonists, having been warned in advance by riders carrying urgent news, mobilized their forces. In the early morning on April 19th, the two sides met on the green of Lexington. The encounter was brief but fatal. Shots were fired, leaving 8 colonists dead and several more wounded. Though small in scale, this confrontation marked a dramatic turning point. It was the first exchange of gunfire between British soldiers and American colonists, and it carried a symbolic weight far greater than the number of casualties. After the skirmish at Lexington, the British forces continued to Concord, where they encountered larger groups of militia prepared to resist. What followed was a series of exchanges along the route back to Boston, with colonial forces using guerrilla tactics to harass and inflict casualties on the retreating troops. The events of Lexington and Concord, later immortalized as the shot heard round the world, demonstrated that the colonists were willing to fight for their rights and that Britain's attempts to assert control would meet resistance. Ordinary citizens had become soldiers, and the line between civil protest and armed rebellion had been crossed. News of these clashes spread quickly throughout the colonies, inspiring both fear and hope. Towns in New England and beyond began to organize militias, stockpiling weapons and preparing for potential engagement. Political leaders convened meetings to discuss responses, draft letters, and coordinate actions across regions. The Continental Congress, which had met in 1774, now faced the task of transitioning from a political body addressing grievances to one capable of guiding a revolutionary movement. Delegates debated how best to unite the colonies, provide leadership, and respond to the growing British military presence. In Boston, the British found themselves surrounded by an increasingly organized and emboldened colonial population. Militias from neighboring towns and counties established positions around the city, cutting off supplies and preparing for a siege. What had begun as isolated skirmishes evolved into a protracted military confrontation, culminating in the Battle of Bunker Hill in June 1775. Though the British ultimately captured the hill, the cost was tremendous. Colonial forces, though less experienced and poorly equipped, inflicted significant casualties on the enemy, proving that determination, strategic positioning, and local knowledge could challenge the professional British Army. The battle demonstrated the colonists' resilience and resolve, providing both a psychological boost and a strategic template for future engagements. As these early battles unfolded, the colonies faced the challenge of organizing a coherent military force from diverse and largely independent militias. Training, discipline, supply lines, and coordination were ongoing concerns. Leaders like George Washington, appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army by the Second Continental Congress in 1775, faced the daunting task of transforming farmers, tradesmen, and volunteers into a cohesive fighting force capable of facing the British Army in sustained campaigns. Washington's leadership, grounded in both experience and patience, would prove critical in navigating the complexities of an army drawn from citizens unaccustomed to formal military structure. Across the colonies, news of these early conflicts galvanized support for the revolutionary cause. In the southern colonies, where economic conditions and social structures differed from New England, leaders began to consider the implications of rebellion. Merchants, planters, and artisans debated the risks and benefits of supporting an armed struggle, weighing loyalty to the crown against the promise of self-determination. Committees of correspondence and local assemblies played a crucial role in facilitating communication, allowing for a degree of unity across diverse regions. The revolutionary movement was no longer confined to isolated towns in Massachusetts. It was emerging as a continental endeavor. The early confrontations also highlighted the complex role of ordinary people in the revolutionary effort. Women, though largely excluded from formal combat, contributed significantly by maintaining households, managing farms, and providing supplies to militias. Enslaved individuals, free African Americans, and indigenous communities faced difficult choices, weighing the promises and risks of aligning with colonial or British forces. The conflict was not only military but deeply social, affecting the daily lives of all who lived in the colonies. During this period, propaganda and communication became essential tools for shaping public perception and morale. Pamphlets, newspapers, and broadsides spread news of British actions, exaggerated atrocities, and highlighted acts of colonial heroism. The writings of figures such as Thomas Paine, whose pamphlet Common Sense would later galvanize support for independence, began to influence public opinion. Ordinary citizens read, discussed, and debated these ideas, further solidifying a collective identity rooted in the ideals of liberty, self-determination, and resistance to perceived tyranny. As 1775 progressed, the conflict expanded beyond skirmishes into sieges and regional campaigns. In Boston, the Continental Army established fortified positions, cutting off British access to supplies and preparing for sustained engagement. The logistical challenges were immense. Food, weapons, ammunition, and medical care had to be sourced from local communities, often under harsh winter conditions, yet the colonists' commitment was unwavering. Each day of preparation and organization reinforced the sense that this struggle was not temporary, but a long-term endeavor with profound consequences. Meanwhile, Britain faced its own challenges. The empire underestimated the determination and resilience of the colonists. Commanders struggled with unfamiliar terrain, hostile populations, and extended supply lines across the Atlantic. Efforts to suppress rebellion through intimidation and shows of force often had the opposite effect, stiffening colonial resolve and inspiring greater coordination among militias and political leaders. The early stages of the war were as much about psychology and perception as they were about military tactics. Demonstrating strength and control proved insufficient when faced with a population united by shared grievances, ideology, and a vision of freedom. The winter of 1775-1776 brought both pause and reflection. While active combat slowed, the colonies used this period to strengthen organization, training, and supply networks. Militias drilled, leaders drafted plans, and political bodies debated the next steps. These months of preparation would prove crucial in the coming campaigns, allowing the colonies to consolidate their efforts and present a more coordinated front against the British. Ordinary people continued to play indispensable roles, whether by providing food, care for the wounded, or intelligence about British movements. The war was already becoming a total effort, involving every segment of society in ways both visible and subtle. As the narrative of these early conflicts unfolded, it became increasingly clear that the American Revolution was more than a series of battles. It was a profound transformation in how people understood authority, community, and self-determination. The skirmishes at Lexington and Concord, the siege of Boston, and the Battle of Bunker Hill were not isolated events. They were interconnected episodes in a larger story of a population grappling with questions of loyalty, rights, and the future of their society. Each encounter, each decision, reinforced the belief that the colonies could shape their own destiny, even against overwhelming odds. By the middle of 1776, the colonies had entered a phase where political, social, and military developments were intertwined. Leaders worked to balance the necessity of military action with the need to maintain public support, sustain morale, and ensure that the principles of the revolutionary cause were communicated clearly. Committees and local assemblies became vital in maintaining coordination, resolving disputes, and addressing the practical needs of communities engaged in conflict. Ordinary citizens, motivated by a mix of fear, hope, and conviction, continued to provide the backbone of the revolutionary effort. The early battles of the Revolutionary War revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of the colonial approach. Militias were passionate, knowledgeable about local terrain, and deeply committed, yet they often lacked discipline, formal training, and consistent supply. British forces were professional, well-equipped, and experienced, yet they struggled with logistics, unfamiliar conditions, and an increasingly hostile population. The dynamic between these forces created a war that was as much about strategy, adaptation, and morale as it was about sheer numbers or firepower. The period from 1775 to early 1776 established patterns that would characterize the conflict for years to come. Skirmishes and sieges highlighted the importance of local knowledge, civilian support, and strategic positioning. Communication and propaganda demonstrated the power of ideas in shaping public perception and sustaining morale. Ordinary people, from farmers to artisans to women managing households, became integral to the revolutionary effort. The colonies learned that success would require coordination, patience, and persistence, and these early months laid the foundation for the larger campaigns that would follow. In reflecting on these early stages, it is evident that the American Revolution was not solely the product of elite leadership or military action. It was a collective effort shaped by the choices, sacrifices, and determination of countless individuals. From the quiet towns to the open fields, from the town halls to the militia drills, the colonies were becoming a society engaged in the struggle for freedom. Each decision, each act of resistance built momentum, gradually transforming a series of grievances into a full-scale movement with the potential to change the course of history. By the time the colonies entered 1776, the trajectory of the revolution was unmistakable. The initial battles had demonstrated that the colonists were capable of confronting a global empire, that ordinary people could rise to extraordinary challenges, and that the ideals of liberty and self-determination were powerful motivators. The stage was now set for a declaration that would redefine the relationship between the colonies and Britain, and for campaigns that would test courage, endurance, and leadership on an unprecedented scale. The early conflicts of the Revolutionary War were a proving ground. They revealed the complexities of organizing a revolutionary effort, highlighted the essential role of ordinary citizens, and underscored the significance of ideology, strategy, and determination. From Lexington and Concord to Bunker Hill, the colonies had begun to write a story that would resonate across generations, a story of resilience, unity, and the audacious pursuit of freedom against seemingly insurmountable odds. The Revolutionary War, after its initial sparks in 1775, expanded into a full-scale conflict that would test the resolve, ingenuity, and endurance of the American colonies. What began with small skirmishes and localized battles soon evolved into campaigns that spanned towns, cities, and vast stretches of countryside. The early successes and failures of both the colonial militias and the British Army shaped strategies, influenced morale, and set the stage for some of the most iconic episodes in American history. Leaders on both sides understood that the war would not be won by a single battle, but through persistence, coordination, and the ability to adapt to circumstances that were often unpredictable and harsh. In the northern colonies, the siege of Boston had set the precedent for early engagement. After the British evacuated Boston in March 1776, the Continental Army gained both confidence and a strategic advantage. Fortified positions and well-coordinated militia movements demonstrated that even a force composed largely of citizen soldiers could challenge the most professional army in the world. Following Boston's liberation, attention shifted to New York, where the British sought to regroup and assert control over the strategically vital colonies along the Atlantic coast. The campaigns around New York would soon reveal the complexity of warfare across such a vast and varied landscape, testing the endurance and leadership of both sides. The Battle of Long Island, or the Battle of Brooklyn in August 1776, was among the first major confrontations after Boston. General George Washington, leading the Continental Army, faced a formidable British force under General William Howe. Despite careful planning and the bravery of his troops, the Americans were outflanked in the dense forests and hills surrounding Brooklyn Heights. The defeat forced a retreat across the East River into Manhattan under the cover of darkness, a maneuver that, though costly, preserved the army for future engagements. The evacuation exemplified Washington's skill in strategic withdrawal, demonstrating that survival and the maintenance of the army were as crucial as immediate victory. Following the setbacks in New York, the winter months of 1776 presented both challenges and opportunities. Morale among the troops was low, supplies were scarce, and the question of sustaining the revolutionary cause loomed large. It was during this difficult period that Washington orchestrated a daring and decisive plan, the crossing of the Delaware River on the night of December 25, 1776. Facing icy waters and adverse weather, the Continental Army surprised Hessian forces stationed at Trenton. The victory was small in scale, yet monumental in impact. It boosted the spirits of the troops, reinvigorated support for the revolutionary cause, and proved that the colonists could conduct complex, coordinated military operations. Emboldened by the success at Trenton, Washington continued the momentum with the Battle of Princeton in early January 1777. Through careful planning and strategic deception, the Continental Army again overcame a superior force, further reinforcing confidence and demonstrating the value of mobility, local knowledge, and the commitment of citizen soldiers. These victories, though modest compared to the size of the British Army, had an outsized effect on morale, recruitment, and the perception of the conflict both domestically and abroad. Ordinary men who might have hesitated to join the army were inspired to enlist, understanding that success was possible through ingenuity, courage, and perseverance. Meanwhile, the British sought to isolate New England from the southern colonies, hoping to exploit regional divisions and rely on loyalist support. The Saratoga Campaign of 1777, which culminated in the surrender of British General John Burgoyne's forces, marked a turning point in this strategy. The American victory at Saratoga had profound consequences. Not only did it lift morale, but it also convinced France that the colonies were a viable and worthy partner in a broader conflict against Britain. French support, which included military advisors, naval forces, and financial aid, dramatically altered the balance of power. The involvement of France, and later Spain and the Netherlands, transformed the war from a colonial rebellion into a global contest with implications far beyond the American continent. Throughout these campaigns, the role of ordinary citizens remained crucial. Civilians provided food, shelter, and intelligence, often at great personal risk. Women maintained farms, cared for wounded soldiers, and even participated in espionage, gathering information vital to military operations. Enslaved individuals and free African Americans made difficult choices, with some joining the colonial forces in hopes of gaining freedom, while others were caught in the crossfire of competing loyalties. Indigenous nations faced complex decisions, balancing alliances and survival in a rapidly changing political landscape. The war was, in essence, a collective effort involving not just armies but entire communities whose daily lives were transformed by conflict. The southern colonies became a focal point of British strategy in the later stages of the war. The British hoped to capitalize on loyalist support, moving from Georgia through the Carolinas to Virginia. Early engagements, such as the capture of Savannah in 1778, initially favored the British. However, the Americans adapted through the use of guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks, and strategic alliances. Leaders like Francis Marion, known as the Swamp Fox, became legendary for their ability to strike swiftly and vanish into difficult terrain, frustrating British forces and demonstrating that conventional military strength was not the sole determinant of success. In addition to military campaigns, the war was shaped by the interplay of strategy, logistics, and communication. Maintaining supply lines, coordinating across distant regions, and ensuring that troops received food, weapons, and medical care were constant challenges. The Continental Army, often under-resourced, relied on local militias and civilian networks to sustain operations. British forces, despite superior training and equipment, struggled with the logistics of operating far from home, in unfamiliar terrain, and against a population increasingly hostile to their presence. These dynamics emphasized that the Revolutionary War was not simply a contest of battles, but a prolonged struggle in which resilience, adaptation, and community support were essential. The winter of 1777-1778 spent at Valley Forge exemplified both the hardship and determination of the Continental Army. Soldiers endured freezing temperatures, inadequate clothing, and food shortages, yet the experience forged discipline, unity, and a deeper commitment to the revolutionary cause. Training under the guidance of European military officers such as Baron von Steuben transformed the army into a more effective and cohesive force. This period of adversity strengthened the army's ability to engage in large-scale operations, demonstrating that perseverance under extreme conditions could yield strategic advantages. In parallel with these northern and southern campaigns, diplomacy became a critical front. Benjamin Franklin and other emissaries in Europe worked tirelessly to secure alliances, financial support, and recognition for the colonies. Their efforts ensured that the conflict could not be isolated to North America, compelling Britain to confront challenges on multiple continents. French involvement, formalized through treaties and military cooperation, provided crucial support in terms of troops, naval power, and supplies, creating new opportunities for colonial forces to challenge British dominance. Spain and the Netherlands, by engaging in their own conflicts with Britain, further diluted the empire's focus and resources, demonstrating that the war was part of a broader global struggle. Throughout these campaigns, leadership played a decisive role. Figures like George Washington, Nathaniel Greene, Benedict Arnold before his defection, and Horatio Gates exemplified strategic acumen, courage, and adaptability. They learned from early setbacks, embraced unconventional tactics, and leveraged the strengths of their forces. British commanders, including General Howe, General Cornwallis, and General Clinton, faced their own challenges in balancing aggression with logistical limitations and underestimating the resolve of their opponents. The interplay of leadership decisions, battlefield tactics, and local support shaped the trajectory of the war, influencing not only individual engagements, but the broader strategic outcome. By 1780, the Revolutionary War had evolved into a complex and multifaceted conflict. The colonies had demonstrated resilience in the face of superior military power, leveraging knowledge of local terrain, unconventional tactics, and civilian support to counter British advantages. International alliances expanded resources and opportunities, while the ideological commitment to liberty and self-determination sustained morale and cohesion. Ordinary people, from soldiers on the front lines to civilians maintaining essential support networks, had become indispensable participants in the struggle, demonstrating that the revolution was truly a collective effort. The Southern campaigns intensified in 1780-1781, with battles such as Camden and Guilford Courthouse illustrating the ebb and flow of advantage between the British and American forces. Despite tactical losses, American forces gained strategic insight, using mobility, intelligence, and alliances to weaken British influence and control. Guerrilla tactics, local knowledge, and flexible leadership allowed the Continental Army and its allies to disrupt supply lines, harass enemy forces, and maintain pressure even in regions with strong loyalist support. The resilience and adaptability of the colonial forces increasingly frustrated the British, who faced extended supply lines, hostile populations, and growing international pressure. The culmination of these campaigns came in the decisive events at Yorktown in 1781. General Cornwallis, attempting to secure the southern colonies, found his forces trapped by a combined army of Continental and French troops, with the French Navy controlling the waters off the Chesapeake. After weeks of siege and bombardment, Cornwallis surrendered, effectively ending major military operations in North America. The victory at Yorktown was the result of years of coordination, strategic insight, and the persistent effort of countless individuals who had endured hardship, uncertainty, and danger. It symbolized not only military success but the realization of the vision that had inspired the revolution from the beginning. That a determined, organized, and principled people could challenge and defeat one of the greatest empires in history. The major campaigns and battles of the Revolutionary War demonstrated the interplay of strategy, leadership, ideology, and community effort. The conflict was shaped by both conventional engagements and unconventional tactics, by military skill and civilian support, and by the integration of international alliances and diplomatic efforts. The war tested endurance, ingenuity, and resolve, transforming a group of disparate colonies into a united force capable of achieving independence. Ordinary citizens, through acts large and small, were essential participants, and their contributions underscored the collective nature of the revolutionary struggle. The experiences of these campaigns, from Boston to New York, from Trenton to Yorktown, revealed enduring lessons about resilience, adaptation, and the power of unity. Early setbacks taught the value of strategic withdrawal and careful planning. Daring victories inspired morale and confidence. Sustained campaigns demonstrated the importance of logistics, training, and coordination. Together, these elements shaped the trajectory of the Revolutionary War, creating a foundation for the eventual establishment of an independent nation. Ultimately, the major campaigns of the American Revolution highlighted the interplay of human determination, strategic thinking, and moral conviction. Leaders and ordinary citizens alike faced extraordinary challenges, yet through perseverance, creativity, and cooperation, they overcame seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The narrative of these campaigns is a testament to the enduring power of collective effort, the importance of vision and principle, and the profound impact that dedicated individuals and communities can have on the course of history. The Revolutionary War was not only a military struggle but a transformative experience that reshaped society, governance, and identity, leaving a legacy that would resonate for generations to come. By the middle of 1776, the American colonies faced a defining moment in their struggle for freedom. Years of political tension, economic grievances, and ideological evolution had culminated in a conflict that had already tested courage, endurance, and strategic acumen. Yet, despite early victories and setbacks, a fundamental question remained. Could the colonies justify, articulate, and consolidate their quest for independence in a way that would unite disparate communities, inspire continued support, and secure recognition abroad? The answer came in the form of the Declaration of Independence, a document that would not only formalize the colony's intent, but also shape the narrative of liberty for centuries to come. In June 1776, the Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia to address the growing sentiment that reconciliation with Britain was no longer feasible. Delegates debated the risks and benefits of formally declaring independence. Some feared the consequences of openly defying the world's most powerful empire, while others argued that moral, political, and practical imperatives left no alternative. Leaders such as Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Roger Sherman were tasked with drafting a document that would justify the colony's actions, articulate grievances, and express the philosophical foundation of their claims. This undertaking was unprecedented. Never before had a collection of colonies openly renounced allegiance to a monarchy and asserted the right to self-governance based on universal principles. Thomas Jefferson, drawing on Enlightenment ideals and his understanding of colonial experiences, authored the initial draft of the Declaration. The document eloquently expressed the belief that all men are created equal, endowed with unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It enumerated a series of grievances against King George III, highlighting violations of political autonomy, economic exploitation, and abuses of justice. The Declaration was more than a statement of intent. It was a carefully constructed argument designed to appeal both to the colonists and to the wider world, demonstrating that the struggle for independence was justified by reason, principle, and moral right. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress officially adopted the Declaration of Independence, signaling a transformative shift in the colony's trajectory. This act was both symbolic and practical. Symbolically, it united the colonies under a common purpose, articulating their vision of self-determination and governance free from external control. Practically, it provided a basis for seeking international support, making it clear that the colonies were a legitimate political entity, deserving of recognition, alliance, and assistance. The Declaration reverberated across the Atlantic, capturing the attention of nations and inspiring both admiration and apprehension. The immediate effect of declaring independence was to further solidify the colony's commitment to the revolutionary cause. Ordinary citizens already engaged in local militias, political committees, and civilian support networks now understood that the stakes had escalated. The fight was no longer merely defensive or reactive, it was an effort to create an entirely new nation. Families, communities, and regional governments adjusted to the reality of formal rebellion. Volunteers joined militias, artisans produced essential supplies, and women continued to maintain homes, farms, and support for soldiers. The declaration gave purpose and legitimacy to these collective efforts, ensuring that individual sacrifices contributed to a shared, meaningful goal. Securing international support became a crucial aspect of the struggle. The colonies, despite their determination and strategic successes, could not match the military power of Britain alone. Recognizing this, diplomats such as Benjamin Franklin, Silas Deane, and John Adams engaged in careful negotiations with European powers, emphasizing both the moral justification for independence and the strategic benefits of supporting the colonies. France, eager to weaken Britain following its own losses in previous conflicts, responded favorably. Formal alliances provided military advisors, funds, troops, and naval support, significantly enhancing the colony's capacity to resist and challenge British forces. Spain and the Netherlands, while not formally allied in the same way, also contributed to the broader effort, creating a global context that stretched British resources and attention. The entry of France into the war in 1778 marked a turning point, creating new opportunities and complexities. French troops and officers experienced in European warfare provided training and strategic guidance to the Continental Army. French naval power challenged British dominance at sea, disrupting supply lines and enabling coordinated operations that would otherwise have been impossible. The combined forces of the colonies and their allies demonstrated that the struggle for independence was not merely a local rebellion, but part of a larger global contest with implications for the balance of power in Europe and the Americas. Meanwhile, the war in the northern colonies continued to test endurance and strategy. Engagements such as the battles in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, combined with ongoing skirmishes, highlighted the need for disciplined forces, reliable intelligence, and adaptive tactics. George Washington's leadership proved essential in coordinating these efforts, balancing offensive maneuvers with defensive strategies that preserved the Army's strength. Strategic retreats, surprise attacks, and careful use of terrain became hallmarks of the Continental Army, allowing them to offset British advantages in numbers, training, and resources. The colonies learned that victory required not only courage, but meticulous planning, innovation, and the capacity to endure hardship. The southern theater of the war presented its own unique challenges. Britain sought to exploit perceived loyalist support in Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, aiming to secure these regions as bases of control and supply. Initial British successes, including the capture of Savannah and victories at Camden, appear to validate this strategy. However, the American forces adapted, employing guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run engagements, and strategic intelligence to counter superior numbers. Leaders such as Francis Marion, Thomas Sumter, and Nathanael Greene became central figures in these campaigns, demonstrating ingenuity and persistence in the face of adversity. Their efforts disrupted British supply lines, diminished morale, and gradually shifted the strategic balance. Throughout these campaigns, ordinary people continued to play indispensable roles. Civilians provided food, shelter, and intelligence. Women maintained households, managed farms, and contributed to logistical support. Enslaved and free African Americans made difficult choices, with some joining the colonial cause in hopes of freedom or security. Indigenous nations navigated complex alliances, balancing survival with participation in the conflict. The Revolutionary War was, in essence, a societal endeavor as much as a military one, drawing on the commitment, resourcefulness, and courage of countless individuals. By 1781, the war had reached its climax. British forces, attempting to secure the southern colonies, were increasingly isolated, facing not only persistent resistance from American forces, but also the growing impact of international support. The Siege of Yorktown brought these elements together in a decisive moment. General Cornwallis, trapped by Continental and French forces on land and blocked by the French Navy at sea, found himself in a position from which escape was impossible. Weeks of bombardment and siege operations exhausted the British defenders, while American and Allied forces maintained coordination, discipline, and strategic pressure. Cornwallis's surrender in October 1781 effectively ended major hostilities, marking a turning point that would lead to the formal recognition of American independence. The culmination of the Revolutionary War reflected the integration of military strategy, political vision, international diplomacy, and societal effort. The Declaration of Independence had articulated the principles and aspirations of the colonies, uniting them in purpose and providing a foundation for alliances. European support, both military and financial, strengthened the colony's capacity to sustain prolonged campaigns and challenge British dominance. The resilience and creativity of the Continental Army, supported by militias and civilian networks, allowed the colonies to overcome significant disadvantages in resources and training. Each victory, retreat, and strategic maneuver contributed to a narrative of determination, ingenuity, and collective endeavor. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 formalized the end of the Revolutionary War, recognizing the independence of the United States and establishing boundaries that would define the new nation. Britain, exhausted by years of global conflict, acknowledged the legitimacy of the colony's struggle, setting a precedent for future revolutions and movements for self-determination around the world. The conclusion of the war marked not only the achievement of independence, but also the beginning of a process of nation-building, governance, and societal transformation that would continue for decades. The experiences of the final stages of the war highlighted the interplay of principle, strategy, and collective effort. Ordinary people, from soldiers on the front lines to civilians supporting the cause at home, were indispensable in sustaining the revolutionary effort. Leadership, both military and political, guided the course of events, leveraging resources, intelligence, and diplomacy to achieve strategic objectives. International alliances provided critical support, reinforcing the moral and practical legitimacy of the revolutionary cause. The war was both a test and a transformation, reshaping communities, governance, and the identity of a people determined to claim their freedom. In reflecting on these events, it becomes clear that the Revolutionary War was not simply a series of battles or a struggle against military forces. It was a profound societal transformation, an assertion of principles, and an experiment in self-governance. The Declaration of Independence articulated ideals that guided action, inspired commitment, and provided a framework for the emerging nation. The integration of diplomacy, strategy, and community effort demonstrated the complexity of achieving such a monumental goal. Ordinary citizens, through sacrifice, perseverance, and participation, made the revolutionary vision possible, ensuring that the principles of liberty, equality, and self-determination were not merely abstract ideals, but lived realities. The final campaigns, victories, and diplomatic achievements of the Revolutionary War established a foundation for the United States as an independent nation. They demonstrated the importance of unity, strategy, and perseverance, as well as the transformative power of ideas. The experiences of soldiers, leaders, and civilians alike highlighted the interconnectedness of military, political, and societal dimensions of revolution. From the adoption of the Declaration of Independence to the surrender at Yorktown and the subsequent Treaty of Paris, the American colonies demonstrated that determination, principle, and collective effort could overcome formidable challenges, shaping a legacy that would resonate for generations. The end of the Revolutionary War in 1783 brought a mixture of relief, elation, and uncertainty to the newly independent United States. For more than 8 years, ordinary citizens, militias, and the Continental Army had struggled against the might of the British Empire, enduring hardship, sacrifice, and loss. Yet, while the cessation of hostilities marked a profound achievement, it also opened the door to new challenges. The war had united the colonies in purpose, but the task of transforming this unity into a functional, Sustainable nation demanded vision, leadership, and compromise. The experiences of war had created a population determined to preserve liberty. Yet navigating governance, economics, and diplomacy in peacetime required a different kind of perseverance and ingenuity. One of the immediate concerns was establishing political stability. The colonies had fought to free themselves from external control, yet internal governance remained fragile. Each former colony had its own traditions, laws, and political institutions. In the absence of a central authority with strong powers, coordination between states was often challenging. The Articles of Confederation, adopted during the later stages of the war, provided a loose framework for cooperation, outlining responsibilities for collective defense, foreign policy, and interstate relations. However, the Articles also revealed the limitations of a decentralized system. The national government lacked the power to levy taxes, regulate commerce, or enforce laws uniformly, creating tension between the desire for local autonomy and the need for national cohesion. Economic recovery became another pressing challenge. The war had disrupted trade, devastated farmland, and drained financial resources. Soldiers returned home to find that their livelihoods had been upended, markets were unstable, and currency was scarce. Debts owed to foreign allies and domestic creditors required careful management, and inflation threatened to erode public confidence in economic stability. Communities worked to rebuild, with merchants, artisans, and farmers playing central roles in restoring commerce and production. The experience of scarcity and hardship during the war had fostered resilience, but it also highlighted the importance of effective economic planning and coordination in ensuring that independence translated into prosperity. Social dynamics in the post-war period were also in flux. The war had disrupted traditional hierarchies and prompted reconsideration of social roles. Women who had managed households, farms, and supply networks during the conflict gained new visibility in public life, though formal political rights remained limited. Enslaved individuals and free African Americans faced complex realities. Some achieved freedom through military service or manumission, while others continued to live under the institution of slavery, highlighting the tensions between revolutionary ideals and entrenched social structures. Indigenous nations, displaced or weakened by the war, navigated shifting power dynamics as the new nation expanded into territories once controlled or influenced by European powers. The post-war period was thus a time of negotiation, adjustment, and reflection, as the ideals of liberty and equality confronted practical and historical realities. The question of governance prompted significant debate among leaders and citizens alike. How could a nation safeguard individual rights while ensuring collective stability? How could diverse states, each with unique interests, unite under a common framework without sacrificing autonomy? These questions would dominate political discourse, culminating in the Constitutional Convention of 1787. Delegates gathered in Philadelphia, recognizing that the Articles of Confederation were insufficient to address the growing complexities of a united nation. Through negotiation, compromise, and vision, they crafted the United States Constitution, establishing a system of government based on separation of powers, checks and balances, and federal authority, while also preserving essential principles of representation and individual rights. The Constitution reflected lessons learned during the war: the importance of coordinated action, the need for effective leadership, and the value of balancing freedom with collective responsibility. Diplomacy remained a critical element in the early years of independence. The United States had achieved recognition from Britain through the Treaty of Paris, but maintaining favorable relations with European powers, navigating trade agreements, and ensuring territorial security required continued engagement. Leaders like John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin played pivotal roles in establishing embassies, negotiating treaties, and asserting the nation's interests on the global stage. Foreign alliances forged during the war remained important for military and economic security, demonstrating that independence did not equate to isolation, but rather required active participation in international affairs. The military dimension of post-war nation-building also demanded attention. While the British threat had diminished, the need for a disciplined and organized defense persisted. The Continental Army had demonstrated its value during the war, yet maintaining a permanent standing force posed financial and political challenges. Militias continued to serve as local defense forces, and state governments took responsibility for their regulation and support. Leaders understood that the ability to defend borders, maintain internal order, and respond to potential threats was essential not only for security, but also for sustaining public confidence in the new government. The experience of war had underscored the critical connection between military preparedness and national stability. Education and civic engagement emerged as vital components of post-war development. The war had fostered a population increasingly aware of political principles, rights, and responsibilities. Schools, civic organizations, and local assemblies became venues for promoting literacy, civic understanding, and public participation. Citizens were encouraged to engage in political debate, contribute to community decision-making, and cultivate an informed electorate capable of sustaining democratic institutions. The revolutionary experience had created not only soldiers but also citizens attuned to the responsibilities of self-governance, and education became a cornerstone for ensuring that these responsibilities were exercised thoughtfully and effectively. Infrastructure and settlement also demanded attention in the early years of independence. Roads, ports, and public buildings needed repair or construction to facilitate trade, communication, and administration. Communities worked together to rebuild damaged structures, expand transportation networks, and improve access to essential services. The expansion into Western territories, negotiated through treaties and settlements, presented both opportunities and challenges, requiring careful management of resources, relationships with indigenous nations, and coordination between states and the national government. The physical landscape of the nation, much like its political and social structures, was being reshaped in response to the imperatives of independence. The ideals of the revolution continued to inspire reflection, debate, and reform. Discussions about representation, suffrage, and civil liberties highlighted both the aspirations and limitations of the new nation. While the Constitution and Bill of Rights established a foundation for governance, the process of translating abstract principles into practice was ongoing. Leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens grappled with questions of justice, equality, and civic responsibility, recognizing that the revolutionary struggle had not ended with military victory, but continued in the effort to build a just and sustainable society. Economic innovation and trade became increasingly important in consolidating independence. The colonies had relied on European goods and markets for centuries, yet independence demanded greater self-reliance and diversification. Manufacturing, agriculture, and commerce expanded, supported by both domestic initiatives and international partnerships. Trade policies, tariffs, and negotiations reflected the need to balance local economic development with global integration, ensuring that the nation could sustain growth while maintaining sovereignty over its economic affairs. Ordinary merchants, farmers, and artisans played critical roles in these developments, applying the skills, resilience, and resourcefulness honed during the war to the challenges of peace. The role of memory and commemoration also emerged in this period. Communities celebrated victories, honored fallen soldiers, and memorialized the sacrifices made during the Revolutionary War. These acts of remembrance reinforced national identity, cultivated shared values, and transmitted the lessons of the conflict to future generations. Monuments, ceremonies, and public narratives served both symbolic and educational purposes, embedding the ideals of liberty, courage, and civic responsibility into the fabric of society. Ordinary citizens, by participating in these commemorations, affirmed their connection to the revolutionary legacy and the ongoing responsibility to sustain it. Legal and institutional development was another pillar of post-war nation building. Courts, legislatures, and administrative bodies were established to provide justice, maintain order, and implement policy. These institutions reflected a commitment to principles such as fairness, representation, and accountability, ensuring that governance was not solely the domain of elites, but accessible to a broad spectrum of citizens. Legal frameworks addressed property rights, commercial disputes, and civil liberties, creating a foundation for a functioning society that could balance individual freedom with collective stability. The experience of war, which had highlighted the consequences of weak coordination and arbitrary authority, informed these developments, emphasizing the importance of rule of law in sustaining independence. By the late 1780s, the United States had begun to emerge as a functioning nation, yet challenges persisted. Regional differences, economic disparities, and social tensions required ongoing negotiation and compromise. The process of integrating new territories, managing relations with indigenous nations, and balancing the powers of state and federal governments tested the resilience and adaptability of the nation's institutions. Ordinary citizens, through participation in local governance, community initiatives, and civic discourse, continued to play a central role in shaping the nation's trajectory, reinforcing the principle that independence was both a right and a responsibility. In reflecting on the aftermath of the Revolutionary War, it becomes clear that the struggle for independence was not confined to the battlefield. The war had created a society capable of self-governance, but translating military victory into lasting stability, prosperity, and justice required ongoing effort. Leaders and citizens alike engaged in a complex process of political, economic, social, and cultural development, guided by the ideals articulated in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. The challenges of nation building were immense, yet the experiences of the revolution provided both the motivation and the framework for addressing them. The post-war period also emphasized the importance of adaptability and innovation. Communities confronted shortages, infrastructure needs, and legal uncertainties with resourcefulness, drawing on lessons learned during the war. Networks of cooperation, both formal and informal, facilitated problem-solving and resilience, demonstrating that the strength of the new nation lay not only in its institutions, but also in the creativity, determination, and collaboration of its citizens. Ordinary people, often acting outside formal authority, contributed to the reconstruction and development of the nation, ensuring that independence translated into tangible benefits for communities across the United States. Education, civic engagement, diplomacy, economic development, infrastructure, legal frameworks, and commemoration all intertwined to shape the early United States. The lessons of the Revolutionary War informed these efforts, emphasizing the value of strategic planning, collective action, and adherence to principle. The experiences of ordinary citizens, leaders, and communities highlighted the interconnectedness of military, political, social, and economic dimensions in sustaining independence. The post-war period was thus both a continuation of the revolutionary struggle and the beginning of a new chapter in which the ideals of liberty, justice, and self-determination would be tested in peacetime. Ultimately, the aftermath of the Revolutionary War illustrates that independence is not a singular event, but an ongoing process. The establishment of governance, economic systems, legal institutions, and social norms required perseverance, negotiation, and collective effort. The challenges faced by the early United States were immense, yet the foundations laid during this period, rooted in the sacrifices, vision, and commitment of both leaders and ordinary citizens, provided a durable framework for future growth. The nation that emerged was a testament to the transformative power of principle, courage, and collaboration, demonstrating that the pursuit of freedom extends far beyond the battlefield into every aspect of societal life. The years following the Revolutionary War were a period of profound transformation, as the fledgling United States sought to define itself politically, socially, and economically. Independence had been won through courage, sacrifice, and ingenuity, yet victory on the battlefield was only the beginning. Creating a cohesive, functioning nation from 13 diverse colonies presented challenges of unprecedented scale. Leaders and citizens alike faced the daunting task of establishing governance structures, maintaining social cohesion, managing economic recovery, and asserting the nation's position in a complex international landscape. Each decision, negotiation, and reform carried implications for the stability and future of the United States, demonstrating that the struggle for independence extended far beyond military conflict into the realm of nation building. The Articles of Confederation, ratified in 1781, had provided a framework for coordination among the states during the war, but their limitations quickly became apparent. The central government lacked the authority to levy taxes, regulate commerce, or enforce laws, leaving it dependent on voluntary contributions from the states. This decentralized system created difficulties in funding the military, paying debts, and maintaining diplomatic credibility. While the Articles reflected a cautious approach to centralized authority, rooted in the colony's experience under British rule, they proved inadequate for addressing the complex realities of governance in a unified nation. Conflicts over trade, currency, and representation underscored the need for a more robust and adaptable system capable of balancing state autonomy with national unity. Economic challenges were pressing and multifaceted. The war had disrupted trade networks, destroyed infrastructure, and drained financial resources. Communities struggled to rebuild commerce, repair roads and ports, and stabilize local markets. Inflation and scarcity threatened public confidence, while international trade relationships required careful negotiation and management. Citizens who had endured years of hardship were now called upon to contribute to reconstruction efforts, whether as farmers restoring fields, artisans producing goods, or merchants re-establishing trade. The experience of economic disruption reinforced the importance of coordinated policy, effective leadership, and strategic planning, demonstrating that independence entailed both freedom and responsibility. In parallel with economic recovery, the United States faced the challenge of political cohesion. Each state had its own traditions, laws, and priorities, and reconciling these differences required negotiation and compromise. Debates over representation, taxation, and legislative authority were contentious, highlighting the tension between local autonomy and collective governance. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 emerged as the solution to these challenges, bringing together delegates from across the states to craft a new system of government. The resulting constitution established a federal framework, balancing powers between the national government and individual states, creating executive, legislative, and judicial branches, and incorporating checks and balances to prevent abuses of power. The Constitution reflected lessons learned during the war, emphasizing the need for strategic coordination, effective leadership, and adherence to principle while respecting the diversity of the states. Social transformation accompanied these political and economic developments. The Revolutionary War had altered traditional hierarchies and expectations. Women who had managed households, farms, and community networks during the war gained greater visibility and influence, although formal political rights remained limited. Enslaved and free African Americans navigated a complex landscape. Some achieved freedom through military service or manumission, while others continued to live under the institution of slavery, highlighting the gap between revolutionary ideals and social realities. Indigenous nations faced displacement, negotiation, and adaptation as the new nation expanded westward. The post-war period required citizens to redefine their roles within a changing society, balancing the ideals of liberty with the practicalities of governance, social cohesion, and expansion. Foreign policy emerged as a crucial domain in the early republic. The United States, newly independent, sought recognition, trade partnerships, and security assurances from European powers. Diplomatic efforts were led by figures such as John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin, who worked to navigate complex international rivalries while asserting the nation's sovereignty. Treaties and negotiations addressed issues ranging from territorial boundaries to commercial agreements, ensuring that the United States could engage with the world on its own terms. Alliances forged during the Revolutionary War remained significant, yet the young nation had to balance these relationships carefully to avoid entanglement in European conflicts that might threaten its stability. Expansion and settlement presented both opportunity and challenge. The acquisition of Western territories required careful management, including treaties with indigenous nations, land surveys, and the creation of governance structures for new settlements. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 established a framework for organizing these territories, setting precedents for governance, education, and civil rights, including the prohibition of slavery in certain regions. Expansion provided resources, land, and strategic advantage, yet also introduced potential for conflict, requiring negotiation, diplomacy, and strategic planning to ensure that growth did not destabilize the nation or undermine its principles. The early republic also faced internal security challenges. Maintaining order, protecting property, and ensuring compliance with laws demanded a balance between military preparedness and civil liberties. Militias and local defense forces continued to play an important role, while federal and state governments worked to establish judicial and administrative systems capable of resolving disputes and enforcing regulations. Experiences from the Revolutionary War informed these efforts, emphasizing the importance of discipline, coordination, and respect for principle in maintaining both security and legitimacy. Civic engagement and education became essential tools for sustaining the principles of the revolution. Citizens were encouraged to participate in political discourse, local governance, and public decision-making, ensuring that democratic institutions reflected popular will. Schools, public assemblies, and community organizations promoted literacy, civic understanding, and the development of informed, responsible citizens. The revolutionary experience had created a populace attuned to the responsibilities of self-governance, and education provided the means to cultivate these capacities, reinforcing the connection between knowledge, participation, and the sustainability of freedom. The judiciary and legal frameworks developed in this period established norms for justice, property rights, and civil liberties. Courts provided venues for resolving disputes, enforcing contracts, and protecting individual rights, while legislatures enacted laws to regulate commerce, property, and social relations. These institutions reflected both revolutionary ideals and practical considerations, ensuring that governance was predictable, accountable, and grounded in principle. Legal structures reinforced stability, provided mechanisms for dispute resolution, and contributed to the legitimacy of the new nation in the eyes of both citizens and foreign powers. Economic innovation and infrastructure development continued to shape the early United States. Investment in roads, ports, and public buildings facilitated trade and communication, while agricultural and industrial production expanded to meet domestic and international demand. Communities collaborated to rebuild and improve essential infrastructure, drawing on the skills, resilience, and resourcefulness cultivated during the Revolutionary War. Economic growth reinforced political stability, enhanced national security, and provided opportunities for citizens to participate meaningfully in the nation's development. Political discourse in the early republic was vibrant and often contentious. Debates over federalism, states' rights, taxation, and representation reflected the diversity of interests and perspectives across the nation. Leaders and citizens alike grappled with questions about the scope of governmental authority, the balance between liberty and order, and the protection of individual rights. These debates were not only theoretical but had practical implications, influencing policy decisions, institutional design, and the evolving relationship between the national government and the states. The foreign policy landscape remained complex and dynamic. Relations with Britain, France, Spain, and other European powers required careful navigation to protect sovereignty, promote trade, and avoid entanglement in conflicts. Treaties, negotiations, and diplomatic missions were essential for establishing credibility, securing borders, and ensuring that the United States could operate as an independent actor on the global stage. Experiences from the Revolutionary War underscored the importance of strategic foresight, careful planning, and skilled negotiation in achieving favorable outcomes while preserving national independence. Social cohesion remained a priority, as regional, economic, and cultural differences threatened to create friction. Efforts to foster unity included the promotion of shared civic values, the development of national symbols, and the establishment of educational initiatives. Civic rituals, commemorations, and public discourse reinforced a sense of common purpose, connecting citizens to the ideals of the revolution and the ongoing project of nation-building. Ordinary citizens, through participation and engagement, contributed to social stability, reinforcing the link between collective identity, civic responsibility, and political legitimacy. By the early 1790s, the United States had begun to demonstrate resilience, adaptability, and capacity for growth. Governance structures, legal frameworks, and civic institutions provided a foundation for stability, while economic recovery and infrastructure development supported prosperity. The nation's international position was strengthened through diplomacy, trade, and strategic alliances, and its citizens increasingly participated in public life, ensuring that democratic principles were embedded in daily experience. Challenges persisted, yet the experiences of the Revolutionary War and the early Republic provided lessons in perseverance, innovation, and collective effort that continued to guide the nation's development. In reflecting on this period, it becomes evident that the early United States faced the dual task of consolidating independence and translating revolutionary ideals into practical governance. The Articles of Confederation, while a necessary first step, revealed the need for a more robust system capable of addressing complex political, economic, and social realities. The Constitution provided this framework, balancing authority, liberty, and representation while creating institutions capable of adapting to future challenges. Ordinary citizens, leaders, and communities all contributed to the success of this endeavor, demonstrating that independence was both a right and a responsibility requiring active participation and commitment. The period of nation-building also highlighted the importance of innovation, cooperation, and strategic foresight. Economic recovery, infrastructure development, and social cohesion required coordination between states, local communities, and the national government. Education, civic engagement, and legal structures ensured that citizens were equipped to participate effectively in governance and public life. Foreign policy and diplomacy secured the nation's position in the global context, while expansion and settlement provided opportunities for growth, resources, and strategic advantage. The early republic was thus a period of both challenge and opportunity, testing the capacity of a newly independent people to translate principles into practical achievement. Ultimately, the early years of the United States demonstrated that independence is not a singular event but a continuous process. The challenges of governance, economic recovery, social cohesion, and foreign policy required creativity, perseverance, and collaboration. The nation's founders and citizens faced these tasks with determination, drawing on the lessons, experiences, and ideals of the Revolutionary War. Their efforts established the foundations of a resilient, adaptable, and principled nation, capable of sustaining liberty, promoting prosperity, and navigating the complexities of a changing world. The story of this period is a testament to the enduring power of vision, collective effort, and the belief that a society built on shared principles can overcome extraordinary challenges and create a lasting legacy. The early decades of the United States were marked by the delicate balance between revolutionary ideals and practical governance, a period in which the nation worked to consolidate its independence while establishing institutions capable of sustaining liberty, justice, and prosperity. The experiences of the Revolutionary War had demonstrated the necessity of unity, strategic planning, and perseverance, yet translating victory into a functional society required far more than courage on the battlefield. It demanded vision, negotiation, and the creation of frameworks that could manage both the diversity of the states and the aspirations of the citizens. Following the ratification of the Constitution in 1789, the nation embarked on an unprecedented experiment in self-governance. George Washington assumed the presidency, embodying both the continuity of revolutionary leadership and the promise of a new political order. His administration faced immediate and complex challenges, from establishing a functioning executive branch to asserting the authority of the federal government over the states. Washington's leadership emphasized restraint, prudence, and a commitment to principle, setting precedents for future leaders while navigating the fragile political landscape of a fledgling nation. The creation of enduring institutions was central to this consolidation. The executive branch, legislative assemblies, and judiciary were structured to provide both stability and flexibility. The president's office coordinated national policy, diplomacy, and defense, while Congress legislated on matters of commerce, taxation, and public welfare. The judiciary, including the newly established Supreme Court, interpreted laws and resolved disputes, ensuring consistency and legitimacy in governance. These institutions were designed not merely to manage immediate affairs, but to create a foundation capable of adapting to the evolving needs of a diverse and expanding nation. Economic stabilization and growth were immediate priorities. The Revolutionary War had left the nation burdened with debt, disrupted trade networks, and a fragile currency system. Alexander Hamilton, serving as Secretary of the Treasury, developed a comprehensive financial strategy to stabilize the economy, including the assumption of state debts, the creation of a national bank, and the promotion of manufacturing and commerce. These measures were controversial, yet they provided the structural foundation for long-term economic growth, fostering public confidence in the federal government and demonstrating the practical benefits of coordinated policy. Social cohesion remained a delicate matter. The ideals of the revolution had inspired a commitment to liberty and equality, yet society remained stratified along lines of class, race, and gender. The Constitution and Bill of Rights protected individual freedoms, yet many groups, including women, enslaved African Americans, and indigenous nations, remained marginalized in practice. The early republic grappled with the tension between principle and reality, seeking to create inclusive governance while navigating entrenched social hierarchies and historical inequalities. Education, civic engagement, and public discourse emerged as essential tools in fostering a sense of shared purpose and civic responsibility, reinforcing the connection between citizens and the institutions designed to serve them. Expansion into Western territories introduced both opportunity and challenge. The Northwest Ordinance provided a structured approach to governance, settlement, and eventual statehood, including provisions for education and the prohibition of slavery in certain regions. These policies facilitated orderly growth while balancing the rights of settlers and the concerns of indigenous nations. Negotiation, diplomacy, and at times conflict defined the process of territorial expansion, requiring careful management to ensure that growth did not destabilize the nation or undermine its foundational principles. Foreign relations continued to shape the early republic. The United States, navigating a complex global landscape, sought to protect its sovereignty, secure trade agreements, and maintain peaceful relations with European powers. Treaties with Britain, France, Spain, and other nations reflected both strategic necessity and the nation's emerging diplomatic capabilities. Leaders like Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Alexander Hamilton demonstrated skill and foresight in balancing alliances, asserting national interests, and avoiding entanglement in foreign conflicts that could threaten domestic stability. These efforts reinforce the importance of a coordinated foreign policy and the role of institutions in sustaining national security and credibility. Internal security and the rule of law were central to consolidation. Shays' Rebellion, which erupted in Massachusetts in 1786, highlighted the vulnerabilities of the young nation under the Articles of Confederation and underscored the need for a stronger federal response to civil unrest and economic distress. The rebellion demonstrated that governance required not only legislative authority, but the capacity to enforce laws effectively while maintaining public trust. The federal government's response to such challenges reinforced its legitimacy and demonstrated the practical benefits of the new constitutional framework. Infrastructure development facilitated both economic growth and social cohesion. Roads, ports, bridges, and public buildings were constructed and improved to connect states, facilitate trade, and enhance communication. Investments in infrastructure supported commerce, strengthened the nation's strategic capacity, and reinforced the sense of a shared national identity. Communities, local governments, and the federal administration collaborated in these efforts, demonstrating that national development depended on both centralized planning and local initiative. Political discourse in this era was dynamic and at times contentious. Debates over the balance of federal and state power, economic policy, and foreign relations gave rise to the first political factions, which would evolve into organized parties. These debates reflected deep differences in philosophy, regional interests, and visions for the future of the nation. Yet, they also underscored the vitality of democratic engagement, demonstrating that open dialogue, negotiation, and compromise were essential components of effective governance. Citizens, through voting, public discussion, and civic participation, played a central role in shaping the policies and direction of the new republic. The judiciary continued to play a critical role in defining the scope of governance and individual rights. Early Supreme Court decisions established precedents for judicial review, the interpretation of federal authority, and the protection of constitutional principles. These rulings helped clarify the balance between state and federal power, ensuring that governance remained both effective and accountable. The judiciary's role in consolidating authority, resolving disputes, and upholding legal principles reinforced the stability and credibility of the nation's institutions, demonstrating the importance of an independent and principled legal framework. Education and civic responsibility were recognized as pillars of a sustainable republic. Schools, public lectures, and civic organizations promoted literacy, critical thinking, and informed participation. Citizens were encouraged to engage in public life, understand the principles of governance, and exercise their rights responsibly. These efforts reinforced the revolutionary ideals of self-determination and civic responsibility, ensuring that the institutions of government were supported not only by law, but by an engaged, informed, and active populace. Economic diversification and development remained priorities. Agriculture continued to be the backbone of the economy, yet manufacturing, trade, and finance expanded rapidly, supported by both domestic initiative and international connections. Policies promoting commerce, infrastructure, and financial stability enhanced national prosperity and demonstrated the practical benefits of coordinated governance. Ordinary citizens, farmers, artisans, merchants, and laborers contributed directly to this growth, applying skills, resilience, and resourcefulness honed during the Revolutionary War and early nation building to the challenges of peace and development. Social and political cohesion was reinforced through the promotion of national symbols, public ceremonies, and collective memory. Commemorations of revolutionary victories, public monuments, and civic rituals created a sense of shared identity and purpose, connecting citizens across regions and communities. These symbols and practices served both educational and unifying functions, embedding the principles of liberty, courage, and civic responsibility into the cultural fabric of the nation. Participation in these acts reinforced the connection between individuals, communities, and the institutions of governance, ensuring that independence remained a living collective experience. The early republic also faced challenges in defining its relationship with marginalized groups. While the Constitution and Bill of Rights established principles of equality and liberty, practical implementation varied widely. Women, African Americans, and indigenous nations navigated a landscape shaped by both revolutionary ideals and entrenched social hierarchies. Debates over rights, representation, and inclusion highlighted the ongoing tension between principle and practice, demonstrating that the consolidation of the nation required not only institutional development, but also social evolution and moral courage. The experiences of this period demonstrated that nation building was a continuous process, requiring adaptability, innovation, and collective effort. Governance, economic growth, social cohesion, foreign policy, and legal frameworks were all interconnected, and success depended on the coordination of institutions, communities, and individual citizens. Lessons learned from the Revolutionary War, strategic planning, perseverance, negotiation, and collaboration remained central to the nation's development, informing policies, decisions, and civic engagement across every aspect of public life. By the mid-1790s, the United States had begun to emerge as a resilient, adaptable, and principled nation. Its institutions provided stability while allowing for growth, debate, and innovation. Economic policies facilitated recovery and expansion. Infrastructure connected communities, and civic engagement ensured that governance reflected the will and interests of the people. The judiciary upheld the rule of law and clarified constitutional principles, while foreign diplomacy secured the nation's sovereignty and international standing. Expansion into Western territories provided resources, opportunities, and strategic advantage, while education and public discourse cultivated an informed and responsible citizenry. In reflecting on these developments, it is clear that the consolidation of the United States was neither simple nor inevitable. The young nation faced economic, political, social, and diplomatic challenges, yet through innovation, collaboration, and adherence to principle, it established enduring institutions and practices capable of sustaining liberty and stability. Leaders, ordinary citizens, and communities all contributed to this achievement, demonstrating that independence was both a right won on the battlefield and a responsibility exercised in governance, civic participation, and societal development. The period of consolidation illustrates the transformative power of vision, principle, and collective effort. From the creation of enduring institutions to the promotion of economic growth, social cohesion, and civic engagement, the early United States demonstrated that the ideals of the revolution could be translated into practical achievement. Ordinary citizens, through their participation, sacrifice, and ingenuity, reinforced the legitimacy and durability of the nation's structures. The experience of this period highlights the interconnectedness of governance, society, economy, and culture in sustaining independence and building a resilient, adaptable, and principled nation. Ultimately, the consolidation of the United States established a foundation for future growth, innovation, and resilience. The experiences of governance, economic management, social evolution, and international diplomacy during this period provided lessons in perseverance, coordination, and principle that would guide the nation in decades to come. The early republic was not merely a product of revolutionary victory, but a testament to the enduring capacity of a people committed to liberty, justice, and the collective effort required to translate ideals into lasting achievement. The story of this period is a reminder that independence is an ongoing process, one that depends on vision, collaboration, and the active engagement of both leaders and citizens in shaping the destiny of a nation. As the United States moved into the early years of the 19th century, the nation found itself navigating a complex landscape of opportunity, challenge, and transformation. The foundations laid during the Revolutionary War and the early Republic provided stability, yet the tasks of governing an expanding territory, fostering economic growth, maintaining social cohesion, and asserting international presence required ongoing vision, leadership, and ingenuity. Each decade brought new circumstances that tested the resilience of the nation, the adaptability of its institutions, and the commitment of its citizens to the principles of liberty, justice, and self-determination. Domestic growth became a defining feature of this period. The population of the United States expanded rapidly, fueled by natural increase and immigration. Communities spread westward into territories that had once been frontier lands, establishing farms, towns, and cities along rivers, valleys, and plains. This territorial expansion required careful planning, the negotiation of treaties with indigenous nations, and the establishment of legal frameworks to organize settlements. The Northwest Ordinance and subsequent legislation provided guidance, yet the practical realities of land distribution, governance, and infrastructure development demanded flexibility and collaboration at both local and national levels. Expansion offered opportunities for economic development, political influence, and social mobility, but it also introduced tensions over land rights, governance, and cultural integration. Economic transformation accelerated during this era. Agriculture remained a central pillar of the American economy, yet manufacturing, trade, and commerce began to flourish in growing urban centers. Entrepreneurs, merchants, and artisans contributed to a burgeoning domestic economy, while international trade offered access to markets, capital, and goods. Policies regarding tariffs, infrastructure investment, and financial regulation reflected the need to balance regional interests with national development. Economic opportunity was accompanied by challenges, including fluctuating markets, regional disparities, and the ongoing negotiation of labor systems, which intersected with broader social questions, including the persistence of slavery in southern states and the integration of free labor in the North. Social evolution was intertwined with these economic and territorial changes. The early 19th century witnessed growing public discourse about rights, representation, and participation. Women continued to play vital roles in households, education, and community organization, gradually expanding their influence, and although formal political equality remained elusive. African Americans, both enslaved and free, navigated a landscape shaped by opportunity, restriction, and systemic inequality. Indigenous nations faced the pressures of displacement, negotiation, and adaptation as settlers moved into their territories. Civic engagement, education, and public debate became critical mechanisms for fostering social cohesion, enabling citizens to participate meaningfully in governance and promoting the integration of diverse communities into a shared national identity. Foreign policy remained a central concern as the United States sought to assert itself on the global stage while avoiding entanglement in European conflicts. The legacy of the Revolutionary War and the diplomacy of the early Republic informed decisions about neutrality, alliances, and trade. The young nation navigated tensions with Britain and France, particularly during conflicts such as the Napoleonic Wars, which affected American commerce and sovereignty. Diplomatic efforts emphasized negotiation, strategic positioning, and the protection of national interests, reflecting the necessity of careful planning and the importance of skilled leadership in securing both domestic stability and international credibility. Military readiness and national defense continued to shape policy. While the nation sought to avoid prolonged conflict, the defense of borders, coastal regions, and key trade routes remained a priority. Experiences from the Revolutionary War underscored the importance of preparedness, coordination, and disciplined forces. Militias and volunteer regiments were complemented by a gradually professionalizing army and navy capable of responding to both domestic disturbances and international threats. These efforts reinforced the legitimacy of the federal government, provided security for citizens, and demonstrated the ongoing connection between national defense and political stability. Infrastructure development played a vital role in connecting the expanding nation. Roads, canals, bridges, and ports facilitated trade, communication, and mobility, linking states and regions while supporting economic integration. Projects such as the construction of the Erie Canal exemplified the transformative power of infrastructure in promoting commerce, enabling population movement, and reinforcing a sense of national unity. Local communities, state governments, and the federal administration collaborated to plan, fund, and execute these initiatives, demonstrating that the physical development of the nation was inseparable from its social, economic, and political consolidation. Political discourse during this era was dynamic, reflecting the diversity of interests, philosophies, and regional priorities. Debates over federal authority, states' rights, economic policy, and foreign relations stimulated the evolution of political parties, each representing differing visions for the nation's future. Federalists, Democratic Republicans, and emerging factions engaged in vigorous dialogue, negotiation, and competition, illustrating both the challenges and strengths of a democratic system. Citizens participated actively through voting, public meetings, and civic engagement, ensuring that policy decisions reflected a broad spectrum of perspectives and that governance remained accountable to the people. The judiciary continued to clarify and reinforce constitutional principles. Landmark decisions addressed the scope of federal authority, the rights of individuals and states, and the interpretation of laws in a changing society. Judicial review and precedent established during this period provided stability, consistency, and legitimacy, ensuring that the balance of power among branches of government was maintained and that individual rights were protected. These developments reinforced public confidence in the institutions of governance and demonstrated the importance of an independent judiciary in sustaining both order and liberty. Education emerged as a cornerstone for national development. Schools, academies, and universities expanded access to knowledge, literacy, and civic instruction. Citizens were encouraged to understand political principles, engage in public discourse, and participate responsibly in governance. Education not only facilitated economic opportunity and personal advancement, but also strengthened the democratic foundations of the nation, ensuring that the ideals of the revolution, liberty, equality, and civic responsibility, were transmitted across generations. Civic virtue, informed decision-making, and social responsibility were cultivated through both formal and informal educational channels, reinforcing the interconnectedness of knowledge, citizenship, and societal stability. Cultural and civic life flourished alongside political and economic development. Literature, newspapers, and public lectures provided forums for debate, reflection, and shared understanding. Commemorations of revolutionary victories, monuments, and public ceremonies fostered a sense of collective memory and identity, connecting citizens to a shared history and reinforcing the values that underpinned independence. Civic engagement, community participation, and cultural expression contributed to social cohesion, creating networks of trust and shared purpose that strengthened both local communities and the national fabric. The question of slavery remained a persistent and complex challenge. While the northern states gradually abolished slavery, southern states relied heavily on enslaved labor for economic productivity and social order. This division created tension, shaping political debates, influencing economic policy, and affecting social dynamics. The issue of slavery highlighted the tension between revolutionary ideals of liberty and the realities of entrenched social and economic structures, illustrating that the consolidation of the nation required not only institutional development, but also moral and social negotiation. Westward expansion continued to reshape the nation's geography, economy, and politics. Settlers moved into territories acquired through purchase, negotiation, or treaty, establishing farms, communities, and infrastructure. The federal government implemented policies to manage land distribution, legal authority, and settlement organization, balancing the needs of settlers with those of indigenous nations and existing communities. Expansion provided resources, opportunity, and strategic advantage, yet it also introduced conflicts, cultural tensions, and administrative challenges, demonstrating the complexity of governing a growing and diverse nation. The early 19th century also witnessed the evolution of commerce and industry. Urban centers grew as hubs of trade, manufacturing, and finance, while rural communities diversified agricultural production and integrated into regional and national markets. Transportation networks, including roads, canals, and rivers, facilitated the movement of goods and people, linking local economies with national and international markets. Economic innovation, entrepreneurship, and skilled labor drove growth, demonstrating the capacity of a free and organized society to harness human initiative for collective benefit. Social movements began to emerge, reflecting the growing awareness of rights, responsibilities, and opportunities. Efforts to promote education, religious freedom, civic participation, and social reform reflected a society actively engaged in shaping its values, priorities, and institutions. Public discourse, voluntary associations, and community initiatives allowed citizens to contribute to governance, social cohesion, and moral development, ensuring that the ideals of independence were not merely abstract principles, but active commitments embedded in daily life. Foreign policy challenges persisted as the United States navigated a turbulent global environment. The young nation balanced trade, diplomacy, and neutrality, particularly in relation to Britain, France, and Spain. Treaties, negotiations, and careful positioning ensured that the United States could engage internationally without compromising sovereignty or stability. Diplomatic skill, foresight, and prudence were essential in maintaining both security and economic opportunity, illustrating the ongoing connection between governance, citizen welfare, and international engagement. Military preparedness remained a concern, both for external defense and internal stability. Militia forces, professional soldiers, and naval units provided security, demonstrating the continuing importance of disciplined and coordinated defense mechanisms. Conflicts, skirmishes, and threats along borders underscored the necessity of a responsive and adaptable military capable of supporting the principles of independence, protecting citizens, and reinforcing the legitimacy of the national government. By the mid-19th century, the United States had established a resilient, adaptable, and increasingly cohesive society. Its institutions provided stability while allowing for growth, debate, and innovation. Economic development supported prosperity, infrastructure facilitated connectivity, and civic engagement strengthened democratic participation. The judiciary reinforced legal principles and constitutional integrity, while education and public discourse cultivated informed and responsible citizens. Expansion, social evolution, and international diplomacy demonstrated the nation's capacity to navigate complexity while adhering to foundational ideals. The challenges and opportunities of this era illustrate that nation building is an ongoing process, requiring both institutional development and active civic engagement. Governance, economic growth, social cohesion, education, foreign relations, and defense were all interdependent, and success relied on the coordinated efforts of leaders, communities, and ordinary citizens. Lessons learned from the Revolutionary War and early Republic informed policy, practice, and public engagement, demonstrating the enduring value of strategic planning, collaboration, and principle in sustaining a free and thriving society. Ultimately, the early 19th century marked a period of consolidation, innovation, and evolution for the United States. The nation's leaders and citizens worked to translate the ideals of independence into practical governance, economic opportunity, social cohesion, and international credibility. The challenges were formidable, yet the resilience, ingenuity, and commitment of the population ensured that the nation could grow, adapt, and thrive. This period laid the groundwork for the United States' continued expansion, institutional development, and the ongoing pursuit of liberty, justice, and civic responsibility. The story of this era demonstrates that independence is not an endpoint but a continuous journey, one that requires vision, collaboration, and the active participation of both leaders and citizens in shaping the nation's destiny. The later decades of the 19th century were a period of profound transformation for the United States, a time in which the nation confronted the challenges of industrialization, westward expansion, social change, and the creation of a cohesive national identity. The foundations established during the Revolutionary War, the early Republic, and the first half of the 19th century had provided stability and institutional frameworks, yet the pressures of rapid population growth, economic diversification, technological innovation, and cultural integration required vision, ingenuity, and perseverance. Citizens, leaders, and communities alike faced the task of navigating these changes while maintaining the principles of liberty, justice, and civic responsibility that had guided the nation since its founding. Industrialization emerged as a central force reshaping the American economy, society, and landscape. Factories, mills, and workshops proliferated in urban centers and along rivers, harnessing water power, steam engines, and emerging technologies to produce textiles, machinery, and consumer goods. Railroads and canals connected markets, facilitating the rapid movement of goods, people, and ideas across vast distances. Cities grew as centers of commerce, industry, and cultural exchange, attracting immigrants, laborers, and entrepreneurs eager to participate in the nation's economic transformation. The rise of industry created unprecedented opportunities for wealth, innovation, and social mobility, yet it also introduced new challenges, including labor disputes, urban overcrowding, and environmental change, requiring careful regulation, social negotiation, and strategic planning. Westward expansion continued to define the nation's development. Settlers pushed into territories acquired through treaties, purchases, and settlement initiatives, establishing farms, towns, and infrastructure in previously uncharted regions. The federal government implemented policies to organize land distribution, governance, and legal authority, balancing the needs of settlers with the interests of indigenous nations and existing communities. Expansion offered opportunities for agriculture, commerce, and strategic influence. Yet it also provoked tensions, conflicts, and moral dilemmas, particularly in relation to indigenous peoples who were displaced, coerced, or compelled to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. The struggle to integrate new territories into the nation highlighted the complexities of governance, diplomacy, and social cohesion in a rapidly evolving landscape. Social transformation accompanied these economic and territorial developments. The rise of cities, industrial labor, and commerce created new social classes, professional networks, and communities. Laborers, artisans, and entrepreneurs navigated opportunities and constraints, negotiating wages, working conditions, and social mobility. Women increasingly engaged in education, reform movements, and civic participation, while also navigating societal expectations regarding domestic responsibilities and moral influence. African Americans, both free and enslaved, faced profound challenges and opportunities, advocating for emancipation, civil rights, and economic participation, while the institution of slavery persisted in Southern states, shaping political, economic, and social debates. Civic organizations, religious institutions, and voluntary associations provided frameworks for social cohesion, moral guidance, and collective action, reinforcing the interconnectedness of society, governance, and individual agency. Political discourse during this period was dynamic and often contentious, reflecting regional, economic, and philosophical differences. Debates over states' rights, federal authority, tariffs, trade policy, and the expansion of slavery shaped legislative agendas, electoral contests, and public opinion. The rise of political parties, including Whigs, Democrats, and emerging reformist factions, reflected both ideological diversity and the practical realities of governance in a complex, expanding nation. Citizens participated actively through voting, public assemblies, and civic engagement, ensuring that the democratic process remained responsive to the aspirations, concerns, and values of a diverse populace. These debates and participatory mechanisms demonstrated the strength of democratic institutions in accommodating difference while fostering collective governance. Legal frameworks and the judiciary continue to define and reinforce the principles of the Constitution. Courts address the balance of federal and state authority, the protection of individual rights, and the interpretation of laws in the context of industrialization, territorial expansion, and social change. Landmark rulings established precedent, clarified constitutional ambiguities, and reinforced the legitimacy of both governance structures and civil liberties. The judiciary served as a stabilizing force in an era of rapid transformation, ensuring that legal principles were consistently applied while allowing for adaptation to evolving circumstances. Education became increasingly important in shaping citizens, communities, and the workforce. Public schools, universities, and specialized institutions expanded access to literacy, technical knowledge, and civic instruction. Education provided the tools for social mobility, economic participation, and informed civic engagement, reinforcing the democratic foundations of the nation. Curricula emphasized not only literacy and numeracy, but also civic responsibility, moral development, and practical skills, preparing citizens to navigate the complexities of industrialized society, political participation, and social integration. Education served as both an instrument of opportunity and a mechanism for sustaining national cohesion and identity. Cultural life flourished in this period of transformation. Literature, newspapers, journals, and public lectures provided forums for debate, reflection, and shared understanding. Art, music, and public ceremonies reinforced communal bonds and national identity, connecting citizens to the ideals, history, and aspirations of the Republic. Civic rituals, commemorations of historical events, and the celebration of regional and national achievements fostered a sense of shared purpose and continuity, ensuring that the principles of liberty, justice, and civic responsibility remained central to both individual and collective life. The issue of slavery remained a defining and contentious element of the national narrative. The economic, social, and political dependence on enslaved labor in southern states contrasted sharply with growing abolitionist sentiment in the North, creating profound tension within the nation. Legislative compromises, territorial disputes, and political negotiations attempted to balance these divergent interests, yet the underlying moral and social conflict persisted, shaping political alignments, elections, and public debate. The struggle over slavery demonstrated the ongoing tension between national ideals and regional realities, highlighting the complexity of consolidating a nation committed to liberty while grappling with entrenched systems of oppression. Industrialization and urbanization introduced new social challenges and opportunities. The growth of factories, urban centers, and commercial networks created both employment and social displacement. Workers organized, advocated, and sometimes protested in pursuit of fair wages, reasonable hours, and safer conditions, illustrating the interplay between economic innovation, social organization, and civic responsibility. Employers, governments, and communities negotiated solutions to these challenges, developing labor laws, social policies, and community programs to address emerging needs. These dynamics highlighted the interdependence of economic growth, social cohesion, and political stability in a rapidly changing society. Transportation and communication infrastructure became increasingly sophisticated, enabling national integration and economic development. Railroads connected cities, facilitated trade, and enabled population mobility, while telegraph lines and postal networks allowed for rapid information exchange. These innovations not only supported commerce and governance, but also fostered a sense of national unity, connecting citizens across regions and providing shared access to news, culture, and civic discourse. Infrastructure became a tangible representation of national capacity, linking physical space with economic opportunity and social cohesion. Foreign relations in the later 19th century reflected the growing stature and ambitions of the United States. Diplomatic engagement, trade negotiations, and strategic positioning allowed the nation to assert sovereignty, protect economic interests, and navigate complex international rivalries. Relations with European powers, neighboring nations, and emerging global markets required skillful negotiation and foresight, demonstrating the continuing importance of diplomacy in securing both national security and economic prosperity. Experiences from earlier decades informed these efforts, highlighting the value of prudence, strategic planning, and adaptability in international affairs. The consolidation of national identity was reinforced through civic engagement, public discourse, and cultural expression. Citizens participated in local and national governance, public debate, and community initiatives, shaping policies and practices that reflected collective values and aspirations. Monuments, historical commemorations, and civic rituals fostered a sense of shared memory, connecting contemporary society with the ideals, sacrifices, and achievements of the past. These practices reinforced both social cohesion and national legitimacy, ensuring that the principles of liberty, justice, and civic responsibility remained central to the evolving American identity. Technological innovation transformed both economic and social life. The mechanization of production, improvements in agriculture, and advances in transportation and communication reshaped labor, commerce, and community interaction. These changes increased productivity, created new opportunities, and transformed daily life. Yet they also introduced new challenges related to labor relations, urbanization, and social adaptation. Society's ability to respond to, regulate, and integrate these technological advances demonstrated the adaptability, resilience, and foresight necessary to sustain both prosperity and civic stability. Civic and social reform movements gained momentum in response to industrialization, urbanization, and social inequality. Efforts to expand education, promote temperance, advocate for women's rights, and improve labor conditions reflected growing awareness of social responsibility and the interconnectedness of citizens within a shared national framework. Voluntary associations, religious institutions, and community organizations provided platforms for advocacy, collaboration, and social cohesion, ensuring that reform efforts were grounded in civic engagement and collective action. These movements illustrated the capacity of citizens to shape social norms, influence policy, and strengthen the moral and civic foundations of the nation. By the end of the 19th century, the United States had emerged as a nation transformed by industrial growth, territorial expansion, social evolution, and institutional consolidation. Cities and towns were connected by transportation networks, economies were diversified and integrated, and citizens participated in governance, education, and civic life. Legal frameworks and institutions upheld principles of justice and order, while cultural practices and public rituals reinforced shared identity and values. The nation had navigated profound change while maintaining commitment to the ideals of liberty, democracy, and civic responsibility, demonstrating resilience, adaptability, and vision. The challenges faced in this period, industrialization, urbanization, social inequality, territorial integration, and moral conflicts such as slavery, revealed the complexity of nation building. Solutions required coordination among governments, communities, and citizens, illustrating the interdependence of political, economic, social, and cultural systems. Leadership, civic engagement, education, and innovation all contributed to the ability of the United States to navigate transformation while sustaining legitimacy, stability, and opportunity. These experiences reinforced lessons learned in the Revolutionary War and early Republic, that liberty requires vigilance, participation, and collaboration, and that the principles of independence must be actively translated into practice to ensure both stability and progress. Ultimately, the later 19th century solidified the United States as a nation capable of adapting to change, integrating diverse communities, and sustaining economic and social development. Industrialization, infrastructure, territorial expansion, civic engagement, and cultural cohesion all contributed to the creation of a resilient, dynamic, and principled society. The ideals of the revolution, liberty, justice, civic responsibility, and national identity remained central, guiding governance, social practice, and individual action. The nation's ability to navigate transformation, balance conflicting interests, and promote opportunity and inclusion set the stage for continued growth, innovation, and global engagement in the century to follow. The story of this era demonstrates that independence is a continuous process, one that extends beyond military victory to encompass economic vitality, social cohesion, institutional development, and cultural integration. Citizens, leaders, and communities each played essential roles in shaping the trajectory of the nation, applying vision, perseverance, and collaboration to translate revolutionary ideals into practical achievement. The United States in the later 19th century stands as a testament to the enduring capacity of a society committed to liberty, innovation, and civic responsibility, demonstrating that the pursuit of national identity, prosperity, and justice is an ongoing collective endeavor that requires both courage and wisdom.